This is Sacha Dench, and she has been investigating the migration flight routes of birds like the Buick swan, which flies in from the north of Russia, and also the osprey, which flies up from Central Africa to the UK. She is extremely dedicated in this environmental work, and in order to do so, she actually has been flying with the birds in order to better understand the problems that they face when they're on these long journeys to the UK. She came very close to losing her life during some of this work, and she is really a very inspirational person, and I would recommend that you listen and watch this video, because she has a really interesting story to tell. However, her latest project is on vultures. These birds are probably the most persecuted bird in the world, and they desperately need help in saving their numbers.
Sacha, tell me about your life before swans, ospreys and vultures.
Grew up in Australia, the UK, and a bit of time in Switzerland, and was originally trained to be a marine turtle geneticist, but over time realised that data alone wasn't enough to cause change, to drive conservation itself.
So how did you get involved with the Buick Swan project, and what gave you the idea of flying with them?
In 2014 was asked by a load of scientists working on the Buick swan, which migrates from the Russian Arctic to the UK across 11 countries. They asked if I'd come and help them figure out how to get all the different people that were involved in the threats to the swans together, because the population was dropping so drastically, and they were really struggling to get people interested enough in the issue to help them try and save these swans. And so they asked me to come and have a look. Basically, they were asking me to figure out if I had an interesting way of getting people from different countries and different industries into meetings. And one of the big issues was hunting. They were protected everywhere, but there was a lot of illegal hunting. 1 in 3 of the birds has shot in their tissues. So I looked at it and I thought, I grew up in hunting communities in Australia, and I know that if you tell stories in the right, you need to find a really good story to be able to bring them in. And I started looking at the migration of the Buick swan and started to imagine just what it was like going from the Russian Arctic in the autumn all the way across 11 countries to the UK. They're starting off in the land of polar bears and reindeer breeders, on some of the wildest wetlands on the planet, the biggest wetland on the planet, and then they're crossing the densest forest of the taiga, and then crossing into Europe, where there are constantly changing landscapes. They're now battling storms, which are worse under climate change, and now we know that in many of the countries on the flyway they're being shot at. And I thought, God, that's a James Bond story somewhere in there, if we find the right way to tell it. And I sat on it for months, and I came up with different ideas, like putting cameras on birds to bring that story to life. And eventually realised one day out flying my paramotor for aerial photography, at the same time we were tracking a couple of birds crossing over the English Channel, and they have to go in a pretty straight line, and we knew exactly the wind speed at the time, and I figured out actually I was doing the same speed as them with my new wing. And that's when the idea started coming together, that maybe the best way to hook people into helping us save the swans was to tell the story from the bird's eye view, and to do it literally, to actually fly with them.
And how did you actually start paramotoring?
I first started paragliding just to get over a terrible fear of turbulence in flight. I'd had an awful flight in Panama on a work trip once, and that left me with a debilitating fear of turbulence. So I thought, learning to fly in a paraglider, you are so connected to the wing, and you're kind of slow that you'd be in contact closely with the air, and I'd be able to learn to read it and get over the fear of turbulence on airplanes. And then I started flying, and it was probably a couple of years of doing really, really short flights because I was super nervous. And then I realised that actually thermaling could be quite fun, so I started to do short flights. And then I saw somebody in a paramotor. With a paramotor you can fly at dawn and dusk when the air is beautiful, You can fly at dawn and dusk when the air is smooth and the light is beautiful. And so my aerial images of wetlands were, really, really powerful. And then once I was, from flying for aerial photography, it went on to flying with birds. I was hooked.
So what are the benefits of flying with the birds?
It's just you fly at similar speed and altitude as the birds in a paramotor. So I realised that would be a really good way of getting inside their heads, getting a feel for what might be affecting them en route. From the air, you can see all the threats to the wetland sites that they rely on en route very clearly. So just after rain, you can see where all the pollution inputs are. You can see how busy it is during their migration, how much tourism, how much hunting, how much other development, what sort of forestry is there happening here. You can see nothing like being there in the moment. The other great thing is that pretty much anywhere you land with a paramotor, particularly for me, as soon as I take my helmet off and people can see that I'm female, they ask you three things, which are, isn't it dangerous? Where have you come from? And how can I help? And I just thought that was an ideal way of talking to people about swans.
You've been involved with numerous projects. What's your favourite one?
It's always the project I'm working on that I'm keenest on. That's where all my focus is. I have followed the ospreys from Scotland down to West Africa, which was an incredible journey. In fact, rather than just figuring out why so many juveniles die, you look at it and actually think it's amazing that any of them survive on a journey like that.
So how can you assist the vultures in this particular project?
One of my close friends at the UN who was dying of cancer, actually, he said to me, can you do the same thing you did for the swans, for the vultures? They, of anything, really need our help at the moment, and they are now the most endangered group of birds in the world. And so they're a very, very different thing to the swans. Most of the birds are migratory, not on a seasonal basis, but because they can traverse 5 or 6 countries in a day on their thermaling, looking for food. The threats that they are facing around the world are pretty extreme, and so are their declines.
Where are you at with Flight of the Vultures at the moment?
There's a PR job that needs to be done on them. So the plan is to do a series of expeditions around the world, working with different experts, and with each of them trying to help them solve one problem. And we have some big ambassadors like Joanna Lumley prepared to help us with that. The second thing is the behind-the-scenes work that needs to be done. There are some issues that have been going on for vultures for decades, and the same approaches that researchers and conservationists are trying seem to be falling on deaf ears. And so we've come up with another idea that actually what we really need is to bring the most powerful forces in the planet in to help us, which are the global corporations. So we've got a plan for a biodiversity intelligence unit, which is otherwise known as MI5 for nature. The plan is for that unit to employ a group of extremely skilled problem solvers whose mission is to try and turn around the system for some of those birds, but also to rally the support of the global corporations to try and help. The repeated thing I've found is that quite often companies who might be involved in the threats can potentially turn things around quite quickly if they really understand what's behind the problem, and quite often that is not the case, and if you ask them in the right way. And so that's our MI5 for nature problem, and within 3 years I'd like to be able to let the whole project be tested on whether we've had an impact on those key issues for the vultures. And whatever we can do to save the vultures will have impact on lots of other migratory birds. And because they're now already seen as quite gross, disgusting animals, if we can solve things for the vultures, then we can pretty much save anything.
Sacha, on a personal basis, how is your recovery going after that serious accident in Scotland?
I'll never be the same person. I use exoskeletons to support my lower legs, but I'm not going to let anything stop me. And I think there's nothing I feel that I can't do at the moment. My next mission is to figure out how to run with these things. You have to run in a very different way. And then hopefully be back to flying a paramotor as normal. If not, I'll use wheels, but the focus is still there. And I might have discovered one tiny positive twist on it, in that previously, when speaking to people about projects like this and hopefully inspiring them to help or to pick up another cause, people could always say, well, that's amazing, but you're some kind of superwoman, and I could never do anything like that. And now I can kind of pull up my legs and show that I've got, aids helping me to walk. And that kind of argument in people's heads kind of falls away. So they can no longer have this argument that they could never do anything like that. And quite often I'm saying, gosh, if you're still prepared to get up and do things like that. On the osprey journey, I was doing it with still a metal frame on one leg and a cast on the other. Yeah, if I'm prepared to get up and do things in that kind of state, then what is stopping them? And that's what I hear back from people. So